They pushed her off the cliff, laughed as she disappeared over the edge. No scream, no struggle, just the sound of boots kicking gravel, and silence. They thought that was it. No ropes, no backup, no chance, just a drop steep enough to erase a body and a witness. But what they didn't know was that Navy SEALs don't need ropes to climb, because she didn't fall. She climbed, bleeding, broken, and furious, up the same cliff they tried to bury her under, and came back with a knife and a plan to burn their entire operation to the ground. Before we show you how Lieutenant Commander Rena Carter turned a mountain into a war zone, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this wasn't a story about falling. It was about rising on sheer will alone. The mountain didn't echo when it happened. It just fell silent. 1 second. Lieutenant Commander Rena Carter was stepping carefully across a narrow ridge, boot angled into worn shale, eyes scanning the horizon for altitude markers, and the next she was airborne. She'd felt it half a second before it happened. The way the 3 contractors behind her had gone quiet, not the comfortable silence of men focused on terrain, but the held breath kind, the kind that comes right before violence. She'd started to turn when the hands hit her back. No shout, no warning, just a sudden weightlessness and the cold rush of air as her center of gravity was stolen by force. She didn't scream, not because she wasn't terrified, but because instinct screamed louder. Her hands clawed reflexively for anything, a root, a rock, a miracle, and what she found was a jagged outcrop no wider than her forearm. Her shoulder slammed into it first, then her knee, then her hip, and then, mercifully, stillness. She lay splayed across the ledge, chest heaving, blood trickling from somewhere beneath her temple. Her left boot hung off the edge into sheer nothingness. From above, faint voices drifted downward, amused, smug. Well, damn, that was cleaner than I thought. Think she's dead? She will be. Ain't nobody climbing back from that without a rope. Laughter, boots shifting on loose stone. A cough. Then silence. Rena blinked upward, blood smearing her lashes. The sky above was already losing light. Dusk in the Balkans hit fast and hard, and she knew the cold would follow soon. But her mind was already working, pushing through pain and shock and betrayal. They pushed me. Not metaphorically, not politically, physically, shoved. The 3 men she'd been embedded with for the past 6 days, PMC contractors assigned to joint drills under NATO's Balkan logistics corridor, had just tried to kill her. Not an accident, not panic, deliberate. She tasted dirt in the back of her throat as she shifted her weight and felt something crunch in her ribcage. The ledge beneath her was barely more than a slab of tilted granite. Below was a vertical drop of at least 150 feet into tree-shrouded darkness. One slip, one twitch. That was all it would take. But instead of panic, a strange calm settled into her bones. She ran a hand down her utility vest, checking for damage. A cracked carabiner, one snapped strap, but the belt rig was intact. A half coil of cord still looped through her left hip. Her sidearm had vanished into the ravine, but the climbing knife was still sheathed against her calf. Alive. Injured. But alive. And that was a problem for the men above her, because they thought she'd die quietly. They thought a fall could erase a SEAL, but they didn't understand the kind of woman Rena Carter was, or what she'd been trained to do when everything, even gravity, turned against her. She pulled her body inward, careful not to shift weight off the ledge. Then, through broken teeth and breath that came like fire, she muttered to the stone beneath her, "They're going to wish I didn't survive this." And slowly, bleeding, she began to climb. Pain had a shape now. It throbbed behind her right eye, pulsed in her ribs like a second heartbeat, burned along her left thigh where the jagged edge of stone had torn through her combat trousers. But Rena Carter had been hurt before. She'd been dropped from helicopters too low to jump, but too hot to hover. Been waterboarded until she forgot her own name. Been pushed through seared drills designed to make lesser soldiers fold in less than an hour. Pain didn't stop her. It reminded her she was still in the fight. She looked up. The cliff face loomed above her like a slab of burned earth stretching 20 feet to the ridgeline. She could see where she'd been thrown from. A cracked section of trail, disturbed gravel still tumbling slowly in the evening breeze. The mercs hadn't even looked down to confirm the kill, just assumed the drop would finish the job. But Rena wasn't done. Not yet. She tested her limbs one at a time. Right arm worked. Shoulder ached but rotated. Left leg was bad. Muscle trauma. Maybe a partial tear. But she could move it. She would move it. She pulled herself upright against the stone, boots pressed into the cliff face, fingers searching for holds. It wasn't a clean climb, not even close, but she spotted something faint in the granite wall just above. A rusted bolt, embedded into the rock, barely visible beneath a crust of red dust. Old military hardware, training anchor. The mountain had a memory. Decades ago, this route was likely part of a SEAL mountaineering drill from the Cold War days, back when the U.S. trained elite climbers to navigate European ridges as fast recon teams. The bolts left behind were mostly forgotten, except by those who'd studied the old playbooks. Rena had. She'd written new ones. She unfastened her utility belt and looped it around her waist, threading her arm through it like a makeshift Swiss seat. A length of climbing cord still clung to the gear hook on her back. Standard issue. Most would have used it for rappelling down. She was going to use it to climb up. Blood slipped down the side of her face as she set her first foot into a groove no wider than her fingers. Her boot slipped. She caught herself with a gasp, hand wedged tight into a narrow crack. "Not today," she whispered to the mountain. "Not like this." As she inched upward, every inch felt earned, every hold tested. Every pull strained something in her that begged to quit. But she didn't stop. Because years ago at Coronado, during her second week of buds, she'd been on a cliff drill when an instructor had cut her rope mid-climb. He'd yelled down, "A SEAL climbs with or without a rope, Carter. What are you, equipment or operator?" She hadn't answered then. Now she didn't need to. She just kept climbing. The rock face didn't care that she was bleeding. It didn't know that she'd been betrayed, that her ribs burned every time she reached upward, or that her left leg was trembling from blood loss and strain. It just stood there, unchanging, uncaring, waiting to see who would fall next. Rena Carter wasn't in the mood to be that person. Her boots scraped along the granite as she pulled herself higher, fingers searching for cracks, edges, anything that would hold her weight. She moved slow, not out of fear but calculation. One wrong grip and gravity would win. Again. She paused at a narrow ledge, barely wider than a rifle stock, wedging her hip against the wall to take the pressure off her injured leg. Her breathing came in short bursts, controlled but strained. Her fingers were cut open in 3 places. Dirt and blood streaked down her knuckles, mixing with the dry mountain dust. And still, she climbed. In the stillness, she heard her father's voice. Not from Coronado this time, but from Colorado. He'd taken her up to the San Juan Range when she was 13. First real mountain. No guide, no ropes. Just her dad, and whatever they could carry in their packs. She'd slipped on an ice face near the top, panicked, froze, told him she couldn't do it. He didn't yell, didn't reach down. He just said, "Cliffs aren't walls, Rena. They're tests, and they only stop the people who stop themselves." At the time, she thought it was just something a dad said to keep a kid moving. Now she knew better. She pushed off the ledge and reached upward again. The climb was no longer just escape. It was reclamation. The mercenaries hadn't just tried to kill her. They'd taken something, stripped her of control, dumped her into the dirt like disposable cargo. That ended now 30 feet, then 20, then 10. She could smell the pine line now. Bark resin thickened the air, signaling that the ridge was near. Her final pull nearly sent her sliding backward. Her boot lost its hold, and for a split second she dangled sideways, one hand locked around a chipped bolt. She screamed, not in fear, but fury, and flung her other hand up blindly. Fingers hit earth, gravel, grass, the edge. She clawed herself over the lip like a ghost, dragging its body from the underworld. And then, stillness. Rena lay flat on the ridge, chest heaving against the ground, cheek pressed into cool dirt. The stars above flickered into focus, but there was no time to celebrate. 100 yards away, across the ridge, Faint orange firelight flickered behind a line of trees. Voices carried. Laughter. She rolled onto her side and crawled to a shallow rise. Through the brush, she saw it. A full field camp. Crates stacked. Radios buzzing. Rifles propped against tents. No NATO oversight. No comms discipline. No drills. This wasn't a joint training op. It was a cover. Arms, ammo, trafficking, logistics disguised as aid. And her presence, her intel access, had made her a problem. They hadn't just tried to kill her to make her disappear. They'd tried to erase what she'd seen, but they'd failed. Rena Carter was back on the ridge, and now she had the high ground. She moved like a shadow with a vendetta. Rena kept low to the ground, circling wide around the mercenaries' camp, using terrain and darkness the way others used walls. Every movement was calculated, slow when needed, fast when possible. Her SEAL training had carved this into her bones. You don't outrun an enemy, you outthink them. She stopped near a boulder rimmed in moss and listened. Still no response from the outpost team. Probably still drunk. Doesn't matter. Load the rest before dawn. Convoy hits the NATO checkpoint at 0600. The voices weren't careful. The men had no reason to be. In their minds, she was a corpse cooling on a cliffside shelf. Whatever unease lingered in the group hadn't yet turned to fear. She peered through the trees. 6 men visible, 2 pacing the perimeter lazily. 1 smoking. A cluster of supply crates marked with spray-painted emblems, medical relief, winter rations, water filtration, aid cargo, supposedly. But she recognized the box design. Military-grade weapons crates with false stenciling. A signature move in black market logistics. She counted at least 3 of the crates being prepped for loading onto a beat-up military transport truck, its tailgate sagging under the weight. Beside it, 2 duffel bags hung open with unmarked rifles clearly visible beneath a tarp. The operation was bigger than she thought. And deeper. They didn't push me because they didn't like me. They pushed me because I saw this. She pulled back and took cover behind the boulder, letting her breath slow. Her earpiece buzzed with static. She'd almost forgotten the shortwave mic still clipped to her collar. Range was minimal out here, but maybe she could pick up internal chatter. Confirmed. She went over. No body, but no movement since. That drops a coffin. She'll be bones by morning. Rena's jaw locked. She could hear the smirk in that voice. There was no need to confirm a kill when gravity could do the job. That was how these men operated. Efficient, detached, surgical in the ugliest way possible. Their type didn't leave evidence, just empty spaces. She eased her way around a patch of dry pine needles and watched one of the men unzip a field satchel. Inside were communication maps, not just for the current route, but entire NATO corridor schedules, transit logs, military-grade encryption keys. But it was the photograph clipped to the inside flap that made her blood run cold. A surveillance photo, taken 3 days ago, outside the NATO logistics briefing tent, of her. Someone had been tracking her specifically, long before this mission even started. The push wasn't opportunistic. It was the entire point. They'd embedded with her team just to get her alone on this ridge, to make her disappear where no one would ask questions. Her intel clearance had warned her about corruption in the region. But she'd never imagined it was this embedded, and now she understood. Her death wouldn't just cover up the operation. It would prevent an entire intelligence chain from catching wind of it. That made her dangerous. And it meant they had no idea the mistake they'd made. Rena slipped into deeper cover, circling the camp once more. She had seen the gaps, the lazy patrol rotation, the half-secured fuel drums, the way they stored their munitions too close to the tents. They thought they were in control. They had no idea the woman they tried to bury was already planning how to dismantle their entire operation, and she was going to start tonight. They'd made 3 mistakes. First, they thought the mountain had killed her. Second, they thought they could sleep without a perimeter. And third, they brought too much fuel. Rena waited until the camp went quiet. Midnight in the highlands meant wind slicing through the trees and temperatures cold enough to keep even the most alert mercenaries wrapped in blankets sipping canned coffee. She used that. Crawling down the embankment, she slipped through the tree line behind the supply tent. No movement, No lookout. Perfect. The fuel drums were stacked in sloppy rows near the tent's rear flap. Plastic, military issue, triple sealed but close enough together that a single spark could link them like dominoes. She didn't need an inferno. Just enough to send a message. She pulled a small strip of detonation cord from her thigh pouch, waterproof, thin, silent, taped it between the drums, looped it over the support stake, and slid a friction primer into place. Then she moved. To the far side of the camp now, shadow to shadow, noise, discipline, perfect, breathing even, heartbeat, steady. Her first target was asleep near the truck, AK slung across his chest, boots off, socks tucked into the webbing of his vest. Rena stepped forward, quiet as falling dust. One arm wrapped around his throat, the other hand over his mouth. The struggle lasted less than 6 seconds. She dragged the body behind the truck, checked for movement. Nothing. They still thought they were alone. She grabbed his comms radio and ammo belt. Didn't need the weapon. Her knife was faster in this terrain. In the tent nearest the campfire, 2 men were playing cards by red lamplight. "Reckon they'll pay us extra for the crates we snagged off that Slovak depot?" One of them muttered. "Nah, this whole op's already over budget. Once we dump the cargo across the border, we're ghosts." Rena didn't hear the rest. She was already on the move again, up toward the ridgeline, where the firelight faded. At the top, she paused, took out the lighter she kept waterproofed in her vest, lit the primer, and vanished into the dark. The explosion wasn't thunderous, but it didn't need to be. It was sharp, fast, loud enough to wake the camp, but precise enough to avoid collateral. One fuel drum burst. Fire licked the tent edge. Screams followed. Then gunfire. Panic. Men shouting orders with no clear enemy in sight. "She's alive! No way! No one climbs out of that fall. You think anyone else could have done this?" Rena crouched beneath the ridge, watching it unfold. Fear had cracked them open faster than any bullet. They didn't bury her. They resurrected her. And now they'd have to live with the ghost they made. Fear is louder than gunfire, if you know how to use it. Rena crouched just inside the tree line, her clothes soaked with dirt, blood, and smoke. The fire she'd started was already dying, but its real purpose had already ignited something more valuable than flame: paranoia. Inside the camp, shouts echoed over static-laced radio calls. "She's alive! We saw her go over! Well, you didn't hear her scream, did you?" Silence followed that one. Rena tapped the newly stolen radio to life, then switched to their command channel. Same encryption pattern she'd cracked during a recon op 6 months back. These men weren't clever. They were cocky, lazy with their signals. Her voice came low and distorted over their open frequency. "You should have checked the ledge." It was the only sentence she gave them before cutting transmission. In the tent nearest the smoldering fuel drums, 2 of the mercs froze mid-conversation. "Did you hear that?" The other nodded slowly, color draining from his face. That was her. "She's talking to us?" Rena smiled behind cracked lips. Talking was just the beginning. She spent the next 20 minutes preparing her next gift. With what remained of her climbing cord, she rigged 2 pressure snares into the slope just beyond the loading area. Standard field traps, crude but effective when placed near likely movement routes. Then she took a risk. Slipping close to the gear trailer, she sliced one of the truck's cargo straps, coiled it into a noose, and tied it around a low-hanging branch above the ledge where she'd almost died. Poetic. If anyone chased her down that path, they wouldn't be coming back up. She left a single boot print in the dirt pointing that direction. Obvious. Almost too obvious. They'd follow it anyway. She knew their type. These weren't planners. They were hunters. They believed in force, not caution. And right now, their fear made them predictable. Across the ridge, a voice boomed. "We need to regroup. Reset the patrols. She's wounded. She won't last till morning." But the voice cracked on, wounded. They were lying to themselves now. Another scream cut through the dark. Not hers. A merc had stepped into one of her snares, rope tightening around his ankle, dragging him hard against a trunk. Bone snapped, then a shot, one of his own trying to silence him. Too late. Panic had already taken root. The next man saw movement in the trees and opened fire, emptying half a mag into nothing. "Where is she?" She's everywhere. She's in the trees. No, she was just one woman. But in their minds, she was already something else. Rena keyed the radio one last time that hour. You didn't kill a seal. You unchained her. Then she clicked off the line, but she wasn't done with them yet. She circled back toward the camp's eastern perimeter, where the communications tent sat isolated from the main cluster. 2 guards posted outside, but both were facing inward now, watching the chaos in the center of camp instead of the darkness behind them. Rookie mistake. She moved through the tree line until she was directly behind the tent, used her knife to slice a vertical line through the canvas, slipped inside. The radio setup was more sophisticated than she'd expected. Encrypted satellite uplink, frequency hopping channels. Someone had money behind this operation. She pulled a small device from her vest, a signal interceptor she'd been carrying since her intelligence briefing in Sarajevo. 30 seconds to clone their encryption. Another 20 to upload the data burst to her own secure channel. If she didn't make it off this mountain, at least the operation's entire communication network would. She heard boots approaching outside. Didn't rush, just pocketed the device, exited through the same slit in the canvas, and disappeared into the darkness before the guards even turned around. When they discovered what she'd done, it would be too late. Every transmission they'd made in the past week was now in the hands of naval intelligence, and disappeared again. By the time dawn brushed the ridgeline in pale blue, the camp had unraveled. Gear was scattered, half the men were gone, either dead, snared, or missing. Those who remained were huddled around the fire with rifles clutched tight, eyes darting to every tree, every shadow, every whisper of wind. And in the middle of it all, barking orders like a wolf surrounded by pups, was Kruger. Rena recognized the type. Scarred, barrel-chested, old-school mercenary with too many tours and too many uniforms, probably ex-Foreign Legion or South African Recon. A man who confused discipline with brutality. The kind of soldier who believed fear could replace strategy. And now, it was eating him alive. He stood near the central crate, gripping a suppressed pistol and snarling into a radio no one was answering anymore. She's bluffing. She's wounded. We own this ridge. No one responded. Not his men, not his clients, not the ghosts of the night. Rena stepped into the clearing without a sound. The others didn't even see her until she was already moving. She walked straight toward him, blood-soaked and silent, rifle hanging from her shoulder, knife in her hand. Kruger saw her, blinked once, and raised his pistol. She didn't flinch. You can't kill us all, Carter. He growled. She didn't smile, just kept walking. When she got within 10 feet, she dropped her rifle to the dirt. The sound was deliberate, metal against stone, final and clean. Let's finish it, she said. And he nodded. The mercs didn't stop it. They just backed away, as if even they understood something sacred had just started. Kruger lunged first. He was fast for his size, military knife flashing sideways toward her ribs. She spun under it, catching his wrist, driving her knee into his stomach. He grunted, stumbled, swung again. This time, he caught her across the shoulder. Blunt impact, but no blood. She absorbed it, twisted low, and drove her forearm into his throat. They grappled. He outweighed her by 40 pounds, but she was faster, her strikes surgical, born of years in kill houses and silent kill drills. He fought like a brawler. She fought like a blade. They slipped in ash and dirt, bodies slamming into crates and tent poles. He grabbed her vest strap, tried to throw her down, but she turned with it, rolled, and they both landed near the same ridge he tossed her from the night before. Only now, he was the one on the edge. Her blade was at his throat. He froze. Rena didn't press it, just stared into him until she saw the cracks. He breathed hard, blood in his mouth. "Who hired you?" she asked. He hesitated, then laughed, bitter and bleeding. "What does it matter? They'll just send someone else." "No," she said. "They won't. Not after what I send them back." Then she reached for the rope on his pack, his own climbing gear, and used it to bind his wrists and ankles tight and brutal, tied with the same knots he once taught rookies how to escape from. He wasn't laughing anymore. "Make sure your clients know," she said as she dragged him away from the edge. "When you push a seal off a cliff, make damn sure they don't climb back up." The flare hissed into the morning sky like a warning shot to the heavens. Red smoke trailed upward through the alpine air, catching the attention of everything within 50 kilometers, including the NATO patrol Rena had clocked 2 days earlier on her satellite feed. If they were still on schedule, they'd be circling back along the valley floor any minute now. She didn't have to wait long. Within 10 minutes, the low chop of rotor blades began to hum across the ridgeline, followed by the glint of sunlight bouncing off the canopy of an inbound NATO Blackhawk. Rena stood near the edge of the clearing, one hand gripping the binding rope around Kruger's wrists, the other holding a field tablet she'd pulled from his tent, a device loaded with route schedules, false manifests, and proof of high-level coordination between the mercenaries and at least one NATO logistics officer. Her body ached, her shoulder throbbed, her face was still streaked with dried blood. But she stood tall. 2 soldiers dropped from the chopper's side doors before the skids even touched ground, helmets down, weapons up, eyes scanning. "Lieutenant Commander Carter?" one of them called, uncertainty in his tone. She gave a single nod and stepped forward, dragging Kruger behind her like a sack of meat. "Alive and uncooperative," she said. "You'll want to tag this one before he tries to talk his way out of treason." The NATO team blinked. She could tell they hadn't been fully briefed. Probably told there was a field exercise, maybe even an equipment malfunction. The usual smoke NATO blew to cover up embarrassment. She tossed the tablet to one of the officers. "That's the real story." The soldier scrolled. His eyes widened as he absorbed what was there. Maps, codes, convoy routes marked for interception, not protection. Even a spreadsheet of expected black market payouts, labeled in euros. A third NATO officer stepped off the tail ramp, junior rank, fresh face, no more than 25. He looked at Rena, then at the cliff edge, then at the smoking remains of the Merc camp behind her. "We thought you fell," he said softly. Rena turned toward him, her face stone. "SEALs don't fall," she said. "We climb." The moment hung there. Then she walked toward the helicopter, leaving Kruger in the dust. He groaned once as the NATO soldiers moved to cuff him properly, one of them muttering something in another language that sounded like a curse. Rena didn't look back. She didn't have to. She'd already won. The Blackhawk rose slow against the morning sky, its rotors chopping through thin Balkan air, casting down a wind that scattered pine needles and ash across the clearing like fallen metals. Rena sat near the open bay door, legs heavy, hands wrapped in gauze. The combat medic had insisted on bandaging her palms and shoulder before takeoff. She hadn't argued. Her silence said enough. Below, the ridgeline shrank, curling away into mist and treetops. The same ridge they'd pushed her from, the same one she'd clawed back up with broken ribs and bare hands. She stared at it now, not with rage or triumph or reflection, just recognition. That was the place they chose to kill her, and it was the same place she'd chosen to rise. Beside her, Kruger was slumped forward in restraints, mouth taped, arms pinned behind his back. His eyes flicked toward her once, searching for something. Pity, fear, negotiation. He found none. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the horizon. The crates were strapped into the cargo bay, 4 in total. Evidence, the medic called them. But Rena knew better. They weren't just evidence. They were the reason her team back at base would learn the truth. The reason this operation wouldn't disappear under paperwork. The reason she was still breathing. The pilot's voice crackled through the cabin comms. "Base confirms receipt of your signal. You'll be debriefed immediately upon landing, Commander. Just hold tight." She didn't answer, just closed her eyes finally, and let her head rest back against the fuselage. She didn't need to speak, not now. Everything that needed saying had already been said on that ridge, in blood, stone, and silence. Could you climb your way back when everyone else thought you were finished? And when it's not the enemy who betrays you, but your own allies? What would you do? Let us know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story reminded you why Navy SEALs are never truly out of the fight, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss what happens when the odds are flipped. And if you know someone who needs to remember that seals don't quit, they climb, share this video with them. Your next mission's already on the screen. Go watch it now, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time with a brand new video.